Hi, welcome to this Open Security Summit session in September 2022. We're joined by Mark Curphey, which is one of the, or actually the founder of OWASP, and somebody I do have a very personal connection with because he recruited me to OWASP when I was doing my crazy .NET stuff. And there's a direct path between that and a lot of the application security stuff to end up doing. So welcome, Mark.
Recruited you into it. That sounds like some political thing, doesn't it? Yeah. So, no, it's great to be here.
Yeah. So my first question to you, it's about, when we started, right, and when you started, and when I started, right, application security was this thing that was very esoteric, right? It was like really a weird thing, right? So can you go back to those days, right? And in the days, like you mentioned, the days where agile development was a novelty, JavaScript was something that ran in a browser, and AWS didn't exist. What was application security then, and why did you create OWASP?
Well, so I was running software security at Charles Schwab in San Francisco, so a big financial services company. And Schwab were pretty much the first people to put online trading online. So I was running software security there, and basically what happened was, hang on, maybe I've told you this story, maybe it was over a few beers and you've forgotten it, but there was a guy, the CIO was a guy called Jeff Penny. He was an English guy, and he came running down the corridor, and he's like, who's this new guy in charge of application security? We're on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. And basically we had a cross-site scripting problem, and some journalists wrote it up. And the reality was 3 people complained about it. One was trying to sell us security tools. The other one was the brother of the guy selling security tools. And the third person was the guy who found the issue or something. And what I discovered pretty quickly was that there was no good set of information that was out there. Like, I was moderating the web app set list, loads of people, Steve Taylor, all sorts of really good people on there. And you would ping them, and they would, they were working at big financial services companies as well. And they were like, yeah, we get the same problem. Like, someone in the company comes and goes, this person's told me this, and there's nothing to go, actually, that's not right, or actually, this is not right. So literally, it was that weekend, it's like, went and wrote the guide, pushed it out on a mailing list, and everything went from there. So yeah, no plan, but it was basically just, how do you get a set of knowledge? I mean, honestly, it was self-serving. It was like at work, some vendors telling me I should go do this. It's like, it's frankly kind of bullshit. Like, so why don't you get something out on the net? And then I wind up knowing people like you for 20 odd years, right? So it's great.
Yeah, absolutely, right. I have to say that one of the things that is insanely good about this is the fact that we've been doing this for more than 20 years. And we still love it, right? We're still passionate about it.
Yeah, I went away from it. I did 4 years in a data classification startup and decided, like, it's in my DNA. And so absolutely, like what I find is kind of interesting is it's reinventing, right? Like, the problems that you're dealing with today are not the problems that you were dealing with last year, or certainly not the problems 20 years ago. So there's always new stuff to learn. There's new ways of doing things, all of that sort of stuff, right?
So if you go back to those early OWASP days, you got a domain, right? You got a site going, which you were paying for, if I remember at the time.
Yeah. Well, it was an HTML page that was just like, pushed up onto some via FTP onto some, published through FTP onto some server. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and then you started projects, right? Which was, I think, a major milestone for OWASP, because the projects allow you to create communities around it.
Yeah, I mean, the guide was the first thing, because what I needed was at work was something that said, like, look, here are all the things that you should care about, and here's how you should kind of look at it. But then, pretty quickly, sort of loads of other things came from development projects. I mean, I don't know if you remember Ingo Struck, back in the early days from Germany, like Ingo was building, Vuln XML and things. A guy called Dave Raffel and Ben Poweski, who were building, Java libraries for things, and they were trying to build a secure portal and all sorts of things. So yeah, that was a whole load of things, right? I mean, in the early days, we had one of the first ever web app firewalls, remember, Stinger, which was, Gabe Lawrence, who's, absolutely awesome now, very, very high up in Toyota security, but he had done a startup and built essentially the first web app firewall, which he gave to OWASP, which was just ahead of its day. So yeah, wide range of things.
Yeah. Well, a lot of OWASP projects, were pioneers, right? There's a lot of OWASP projects that were the first one of its kind, right? To really do that. So then you had the OWASP Top 10, and that was a major milestone, right?
Yeah, I mean that was all Jeff Williams, right? Like he came up with that idea, and I think that's kind of become pretty iconic, right? I mean, like if you go talk to, obviously OWASP's got a bunch of great stuff, but I think if you talk to anyone, like the top 10 is the thing that most people know about it. Certainly, kind of broader outside of the security AppSec world, right? You go talk to developers, and they all know about that.
Yeah. And again, it's that interesting blessing and a curse, right? Because when PSI said, "Hey, it's a standard," and everybody,
for sure,
standard.
No, right? And like, what is it? I mean, I always used to laugh. Like, what is it? The top 10 of what? Like, is it the top 10 most prevalent things? Top 10 most important things? Like, what is it? The top 10 of? And I know there's been a bunch of work on it, but like, it just became a thing. Like, people didn't question it, right?
Yeah. But it shows the power of being in the right place at the right time and putting something that allows you to go web application. I have you at least look at this stuff, right?
Yeah. And I also think it's interesting when you look at like education and awareness, like you make something simple and easily to digest, and people would do the right thing, right? And that's what it was. It was like 10 things. People don't question what those 10 things are. They don't like worry so much, but they're like, oh, here's 10 things I need to understand. Okay, there's 10 things, I'll take them on. And PCI and all those other things reference it, right?
Exactly. And then we created a community, and then there was that first conference in New York, in New Jersey.
Yeah, Hoboken, right?
Yeah,
I know. Stan Guzik, Bill Howe, all of those guys did that. Was it Hoboken Institute? Jeff, I think, wasn't it?
Looking up, saying, "Whoa, are you tall?"
Yeah. No, I mean, it's funny. You meet people for the first time, and I mean, crazy, right? I mean, that was very well attended as well, wasn't it? From such early on. I don't know how many people were there, but it was. It was very well attended. I think there's an awful lot of people from New York banks and other things that came to there because of the proximity, right?
Yeah, because I think that's when OWASP started to become a community, because you start to say, not only wasn't before, but we're like, this is for real. This is actually, people, the Royal Holloway.
Yeah, but the meeting I always remember is in the boat club with you and a bunch of other people in London, where there was quite a few of those consumed, quite a bit of heckling, and that was a fantastic meeting, right? I always remember that was 20 years ago, right?
And I have to say, like, when I was reading your manifest, right, about OWASP, I do feel that some of that creativity, some of that ability to just do stuff, got lost halfway through it, because like the London chapter, which, Sam is actually here, and, they've done a fantastic job, him and Sharif taking on. But I remember when me and Dan Cuthbert started it, it was literally just going, let's go to a pub. And we did a bunch of them close to ABN AMRO in the pub there, and then we did and that one is just because I happen to live close to Hammersmith, and let's do one over there, right? And that's how we started it. Go to a pub, talk about application security, right? And it worked pretty well.
I mean, I guess they're different, right? I mean, I attended the event that Sam put on last week, and it was just incredibly, like, polished and a beautiful building, and organized and everything. And I guess it's just like different from that. Let's go down to the pub and have a few beers and chat about stuff. But I mean, I think you can do both, right? Like, I think, I think there's opportunities for both. I mean, one of the other things in the manifesto is I think that unfortunately OWASP's lost a lot of deep technical people, or they haven't joined. And part of that is they want the informality, and they want to spend time with other deep technical people. And there's a big breadth of like people that are needed in projects. But if you lump them all in together, you kind of wind up losing some of that type of spirit, right?
I have a whole bunch of questions about OWASP. Let's just wrap up the AppSec. So AppSec in those days, in a way, was that moment where we were really trying to get the business to take it seriously, right? And even some of the early exploits, there was definitely a moment where we found very good ways to exploit applications, right? But there were almost like, I do remember these conversations laid down, the pub, or with people were going, when we find all this stuff, who really is exploiting this? Like, and there's a moment where if you were really honest and integrity, you're going, the data doesn't support it, right? Like, we're trying to predict what's going to happen next. But I would probably say the last 5 to 7 years, because the commercial model of the attackers and because of the interconnectivity of the web changer, now it's for real. Now, web apps, it's our big business in both sides, right?
I mean, look, I think it's been for real for a long time. I mean, actually, I'm not sure if I've ever told you this story, but like in 2012, I was out in Saudi Arabia when the big oil company got hacked, and was helping figure out how to recover it. And without speaking out of turn, like business apps and things are always web apps are often things that expose those type of things, and they wind up taking complete, infrastructure down, right? So yeah, it's different. I mean, in the early days, like, if you go think about OWASP in the early days, like JavaScript was a browser thing, and everyone would like turn off JavaScript in your browser, it's evil. Like, who would say that now? Everyone built their own data centers, right? There was no AWS or anything like that, and it's just a fundamentally different kind of world, right? So people, the types of hacks that people were talking about were like, replacing hidden form fields and pushing them into a post on a form, right? It's like, and SQL injection was just like, it's a thing that happens all the time. And, so yeah, it's different. Stuff's changed a lot, right? The landscape's just fundamentally changed.
And open source, also changed, right? I remember that when we started, open source was still viewed as communism and socialism and evil and all that stuff, right? And it was a killer because it just killed sometimes a lot of threads. But now open source is very deeply embedded in our world, right? And it showed where there's good things, there's bad things, but there's place where it adds insane value, and it really shows its power, right? And the power of openness.
I mean, look, it's on rockets that go to space. I mean, machine learning processes. Yeah, I mean, it's just completely pervasive. The world wouldn't be what it is today without open source, right? Like that building on stuff. I mean, think about all the stuff that uses things like Spark. Think about all the stuff that uses, half of these things that sit online. Like no one would go reproduce clean room implementations of those things. So it's just building on the steps, right?
Yeah, and the cloud providers, right? That's how they scale, right? And that completely changed the landscape, right? Of it.
Totally. I mean, you got ubiquity of infrastructure, so you got essentially unlimited resources. You've got loads of people that have solved loads of problems that would take you ages. I mean, God, if you're building a web app today, who doesn't use Auth or Auth0 or Okta? Like, it's just the way it is. Like, who doesn't use Segment to pass all their telemetry around? Like, so instead of having to go build all of these things, like all the building blocks are there, and then you just go focus on building the value on top, right? So
it's why you need to get into worldly mapping, man, because it's awesome to visualize that.
Right. God.
So let's talk a little bit about, before we go to OS, right? About application security and its evolution in the pipeline, right? So we got the whole DevSecOps movement, right? Which is about putting these practices. The one I want to explore a bit with you is this concept of application security fundamentally are best practices. And we now have data to show that the apps that do the practices that we kind of recommend from application security ship faster. They forgetting about the security benefits, they have tremendous other benefits. So are we also getting to the point where we can really make the business case that developing secure apps is like pollution, is that it's a much more efficient way of developing, a more profitable way of developing. So you don't do it because you have to, or you're worried about being hacked. You're doing it because you get insane other benefits. And of course, you are secure at the end.
Well, I've always seen it as a quality issue. So it's like there's loads of quality issues. And when you have quality software, it's reliable, it's robust, it's maintainable. It's like all of those things. You also know that you're always going to get bugs in software. So you're always going to get security issues. But when you have the process of how to deal with it, process back in the UK now, process, not process, then, it's there. I mean, look, when I built SourceClear, that only really took off among developers when developers realized that we could update libraries to ones that didn't have a problem. So like the special source there was like, we did a call graph analysis. So it's like, you're actually using this thing or you're not, therefore you don't need to update. But if you are going to update, don't update to that version because you'll get an exception, right? Like you're using part of that, the API has changed, update to this version, safe and nothing will break. And the minute you did that, developers started using stuff just to update dependencies, and in doing so, wound up fixing the security problems. And so I think like if you can find, and there aren't huge amounts of those examples, but when you can find them, but if you look at like Okta and Auth0, or even people writing their own crypto code, like back in 2000s, like, don't write your own crypto was a thing. Like, I can't imagine anyone would tackle that now, but you can eradicate complete classes of problems away, right? By doing it. And then the whole company, everyone gets to innovate faster and all that sort of stuff, right? So.
Yeah. And then you get all the business benefits, right? From doing that.
Of course. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so your path took you from the OS world, and you did consulting, then you did a Microsoft stint, right? Which was I'm sure quite interesting. And then you did a startup, right? A couple startups.
You smirked at the Microsoft stint, didn't you? Come on, bring it out.
No, I think, I guess from your side, what was it like to work, and there's a lot of great stuff about Microsoft, right? And I think they completely reinvent themselves, right?
I agree. I mean, I have nothing but great things to say. I mean, it wasn't a long-term company for me, but it's a friggin' machine, and I really enjoyed being there. Yeah, I mean, so I left Charles Schwab. I did a stint at Foundstone. We got then acquired by McAfee, the antivirus company. So I spent 4 years then reporting to, they didn't really know what to do with the services business, right? So I wound up reporting to the president of McAfee and, helping with M&A and all sorts of other stuff. He was just a great guy. So, how do I say it politely? Like, not the best company in the world, but I actually had 4 years of, really interesting and good work there. After that, I went to Microsoft. So I ran two things actually. Initially, when I got there, I ran this team called the ACE team, which was basically I had a mass collection of tools. Like, I owned the tools that produce the SSL certs for Xbox. Yeah. I owned the access control to the Windows kernel. I owned what was before Active Directory. It's called Auto Group there. I owned Product Studio, which was actually the internal tool before TFS. I had including contractors, I had about 400 engineers.
So you had cat.net, remember that one?
Cat.net was a side project, exactly. Which was an interprocedural static analysis tool. I had one of the 3 threat modeling tools that Microsoft had. Yeah. I had a big collection of stuff. So I did that, and then I did that for a couple of years, and then I ran MSDN, the Microsoft Developer Network, which is TechNet, which is basically the way Microsoft distributes developer tools. So if you're a developer, you buy an MSDN subscription, you get access to every Microsoft product. So mass, million subscribers, 50 million page views a month, just mass scale web stuff, which was really interesting to do. We had on my CMS, I had all of the APIs indexed across all the products as well. So I would serve up all the documentation. So again, it was really interesting engineering, right? At scale. It's not the stuff.
And at the time where that was that common, right? At the time where people didn't really thought of websites at scale.
Yeah, totally. And look, most of our stuff was written in C. I mean, it's not written in .NET when it scales at that size, right? Like, it's, when I built the CDN that when Windows, I think it's Windows 8, wasn't it? Windows 7 shipped for the first time digitally. It had never been done before. It was always on CDs. And so we shipped it digitally for the first time. The scale of that, I think we had like 11% of the world's internet traffic the day that was released. And so, stuff like that it's big engineering of how you have to do it, and super interesting. And Microsoft did brilliant, all that sort of stuff. Right?
So what happened with cat.net? For me, it was such a wasted opportunity, because it could have been the thing that tipped the static analysis world, because we still don't have open source, really solid static analysis engine out there.
Well, maybe not. Maybe coming, right? I guess not true open source. We should talk about CodeQL. So, I mean, honestly,
yes, CodeQL is interesting.
CodeQL is super
interesting. And SEMgrep is very interesting. Yes, but
SEMgrep maybe,
but cat.net was doing interprocedure analysis. Dude,
the reality. So here's what actually happened. The reality was the majority of the code was written by one guy who's an absolute freaking genius, Susan. It was a side project that was kicked off by the ACE team, and and inside of Visual Studio, you could hit, Alt F5 or whatever it was. I haven't used a Windows machine for like 15 years, but whatever it was. And you could run your own analysis, which was an intra-procedural analysis, right? Yeah. So ran very fast, but very low fidelity. Cat.net was inter-procedural analysis, so a lot slower, but a lot more accurate.
Yeah.
But ultimately, there were kind of like two competing stories, right? And given that Cat.net was not created in a product team, it was essentially like, shut down. And when that's the way things work at Microsoft. It's like, it's very political, and unless it's strategic to what they want to do, it just doesn't work, right?
And I guess at the time when open source was still not seen as a great way to publish.
I tried to get it. I mean, there's a guy called Ben Lifshitz who also lives in London, actually. I think he's over near you, who's in Microsoft Research. And Ben used to do a lot of the work. He's an absolute genius. And we tried, but I could never get it open source before I left, which is a real shame.
Yeah, that I built a real-time code. I have a video. I used to show this. This is the future. I had a real-time code scanner with cat.net where as you write the code, I was
I
scanning it
know.
behind the scenes.
I know.
And I even use, remember Reflector? The .NET.
Yep.
I use Reflector to output the whole of cat.net source code. I never put it on a public repo because I was like, I'm not sure how it's going to fly. But I literally have the source code of cat.net, right? And I was like, just push it.
Intermediary languages. We never did anything to hide.
No. There was some cool hack. No. There was some crazy hacks that the guy had done in it.
Really?
It wasn't. Yeah. It was not full PRL, but it was pretty awesome, right? I managed to fix them, and it was. But the thing I was able to do is with the O2 platform. If you remember at the time, I was calling it directly all the hooks, so I had it loaded in memory, and it was insanely fast, right? So definitely a project that still needs to be picked up one of these days.
Ben was building, before he left Microsoft Research, was building some JavaScript analysis stuff as well, which was pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, they're an amazing, like the people at Microsoft are just amazing engineers. Like I mean, like I said, I haven't touched a Windows machine for freaking God knows how long, 15 years probably, but have nothing but respect. And especially if you look at what they've done with Azure, like, freaking like they're a machine, right?
Cool. All right, now let's shift to OWASP, right? Because I think that's where your baby started, and that's now you have a new chapter on it, right? So you were in I think fair to say you're on the first generation of OWASP, right? If anything, you attracted, basically I think the next generation, because if you look at the first batch of board members, which by the way was literally created in that through original sort of style of going, hey, we should formalize some of these.
Yes.
Who are literally, I think we were at eBay at the conference there, and I was talking to Jeff and go, you know what, we really should formalize it. So who are the people who are doing stuff globally? And it was me, Jeff Williams, Dave Rickers, right? And Tom. And they were like, the Seba is doing some great stuff in Europe. Let's call him. So we're literally saying, and that was it, right? But you brought them all into the fold, right?
Well, also the advisors, I'm actually going to meet up with Seb hopefully in 2 weeks at BrewCon. But also the advisors, right? Like Chris Wysopal, Greg Hogland. I don't know if you remember Greg. Like, oh my God! Like, talk about technical talent. John Biega, who I've started the new company with. Like, all of those people are on that advisory board as well. And I mean, you just got to ask people, haven't you? Or look for the people that do the work and go get them on board, right?
And the power, I think, of OWASP for me was also a great lesson of, if you put the right foundations and you point on the right track, even when you have players who don't understand it or who almost are not doing the right thing or trying to do the right thing but not doing it. But if the model is right, like the foundations is right, like the foundations of openness, the foundations of projects, the foundations of chapters, that was almost enough to keep it and keep evolving, right?
Totally. I mean, look, it's one of the reasons we're running now is like, I think some things need to be updated. Like I said, like when the project was started, it was web, like it's no longer that anymore. AWS wasn't created, all of that. Like it's fundamentally different. And the project's grown fundamentally. But like one of the big lessons, and I'm proud of this, and a lot of people, frankly, still can't stand me on the internet, and I don't give a crap, because in the early stages, some people wanted to get products that we recommended. And it was GPL code, and it was bollocks. Like basically they were trying to use OWASP to get adoption, and it wasn't, it was GPL in a way that you couldn't then go and take that code. And they knew that, banks particularly, God, I mean, if you touch GPL at most companies, like you'd been fired back in those days. And putting the stake in the ground and saying, no, that's not okay, was really important for the vendor neutrality thing, which is it's a tough subject, right? It's like and it always will be, especially when a lot of those people are involved. But like, putting a stake in the ground around how those things work, I think sets the tone, right?
And I think that vendor almost allergic reaction, I think, has always been very healthy at OWASP, right? Although I do agree when you talk about the center of gravity sometimes being consultants, right? I remember thinking for a long time that the future of OWASP is when it shifts, right? And you could see it happening. Like what's interesting is, if you take me as an example, right? I think there's a lot of people in our community that now work for, the people who need it to work, right? It's kind of like, some of us, worked in vendors or tools, etc. But there's a lot of, the community starts to be driven by the people that need it to work, right? It's almost like, you have a level of pragmatism when it's actually you on the line, because it's your job not to sell a product or not to do something for compliance, but to actually protect it. And if you don't do it right, you have the consequences. And that, I think, is the community that should be driving OWASP, right? Because it's much more pragmatic.
Well, Yeah, I mean, first of all, no one's like you, mate. So when you say like me, like that's, but I mean, the problem in the early days, there were a bunch of really good engineers, like I said, Ingo Struck and Dave Rafael and Ben Poeski and all of these guys. And ultimately, I think that they got frustrated because they wanted to be involved in building software, and most of the people that were involved wanted to basically hack HTTP or HTML, and they were like, this is not the stuff that I want to get involved with. And so that first kind of generation of those guys kind of cycled through. I think what's been true ever since, for the most part, is application security consultants. There's a lot of them that are involved. For a long time, web app pen testing was the thing. So you've got a huge amount of web app pen testers there, and it becomes cyclical, right? So it's like deep technical people want to spend time with deep technical people. Web app pen testers want to spend time with web app pen testing people. And so I think that cycle has been there, and I think always will be, right? But that's why I think that today there needs to be a conscious thing to figure out, how do you appeal to developers? How do you appeal to deep technical people who want to go work on those projects? And I don't think there's anything wrong. It's not segregation in any sense, but you have to think about what motivates those people. Yeah. I mean, again, I went to the meeting that Sam ran. It was incredibly well organized, etc. But the talks were really high level, right? And that's not to say that was wrong, because maybe most of the audience were really high level as well. I suspect they were. But there's got to be a forum for that deep technical stuff as well, to go and attract those people. And I think you can probably figure out how to do it in both. But it has to be conscious. Otherwise, what happens is you kind of wind up with lowest common denominator, right? Which, probably doesn't appeal to everyone, right?
Yeah. So one of the beauties I always felt of OWASP is it created an umbrella for all types of people to exist. And I remember being frustrated for a while when we were trying to define the mission and the vision. I'm thinking, it's so simple. Is these people love application security? That's it. And you actually have almost like a beauty of all these groups that you cannot create a unified thread apart from the fact that everybody here loves application security. But some people, like you said, want to go super technical. Some are on governance, some are on education, some are on threat modeling. And actually the beauty of OWASP is it's I still think one of the most biggest powerhouses of research and development in a planet on application security. Even if you look at the projects today, the sparks are all there, right? And some of them have evolved into really great quality, which I think your plan now is to also support them. Correct?
Yeah, so yes. I mean, there's an amazing amount of work, amazing people, and all of that. But I think it's also true, particularly if you look at what the Open Source Security Foundation have done recently, right? Funded Sigstore, right? Basically put code signing available. Previously funded Let's Encrypt. Had basically deployed teams to go find and fix holes in vulnerabilities. Investing and building static analysis tools and things like that, right? So I think, yes, it's amazing, but needs to be better, because otherwise it's going to become irrelevant, right? The world's changing, and the world's changing really fast, which is kind of why there's this, look, things have to change. And I know that there's a lot of people that don't want it to change because people get comfortable, right? And I really understand that, but I think the appeal to those people is in five years, the world will have moved on, and projects like Open Source Security Foundation and others will be doing all of the work. OWASP will become a sucker or whatever it is, right? That thing that no one goes to anymore, right?
Well, because I think the hard question here is OWASP has grown in the last decade, but OWASP was a big player in a small pond. The pond freaking grew spectacularly, but OWASP should have grown with it. Look, Let's Encrypt is a great example, right? That was an insanely well-delivered project to put SSL everywhere. That fits so well within the OWASP mission, right?
Totally. Look, I did an interview with Zemlin the other day, and I think OWASP should figure out how to work with the Linux Foundation. I'm not saying become part of it. But it needs to figure out how to really have a better relationship, because they have the ability to raise money. They have a really good organization behind it. They have full access, CNCF, Node, Kubernetes, all these things are sat within it. And, I was chatting with Zemlin about this the other day, and he recounts the story, and I'm going to publish this on a video online next week or the week after. He recounts the story about OpenSSL when Shellshock was there. I mean, he literally raised $6 million over a weekend to go give to the people that wrote OpenSSL to fix it.
Yeah.
Like that power, or things like, you know, like funding, funding Sigstore now, you know, all of those types of things. Like these are big projects that have a massive impact, right? And right now, if you kind of look at it, like go look at the people that are involved. Like it's Mark Russinovich, right? CTO for Azure, like sits on the board over there. It's like the thing's run by Bellendorf, who was the founder of Apache. You know, Chris DeBona at Google and Eric Brewer, who runs open source at Google. And they have the ability to A, open doors, but B, like, you know, look, here's where pools of money are, or here's how to make things happen. And that, you know, OWASP, like you said, I think OWASP should be at the forefront of all of that. But right now it's not. Right now it's operating on the sidelines. It's, you know, it's not there in the thick of those things. And I think that's sad, because I think it should be.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. So we had a cool question here from Vinod is, do you think OWASP should move from a 501c to a 501c6 type organization like the Linux Foundation? So I guess maybe just quick explain what's the difference between C3 and C6.
I don't know what the difference is. Vinod, are you able to explain?
Vinod, you can. Oops.
I mean, look, Vinod. I mean, here's the general answer, Vinod. Like, and again, I'll publish this thing from Zemlin. But basically, the way the Linux Foundation works is similar to the way hospitals and you know, teaching hospitals and other things work, right? Like they operate in many ways like commercial businesses, but they have an altruistic goal. You know, it's a teaching hospital. It's both to provide medical care and to provide teaching facilities to make people the best doctors. But, you know, they're not going to do that by, you know, asking the doctors to chip in 50 quid, you know, to be members of this thing, or, you know, getting 25 grand from, you know, Ford to go buy a few ambulances. Like it's operated like a machine, and they know how to go raise money. They're very good at kind of saying, look, here's what we're going to do with the money. They're very good at going back saying, look, here's the return on that money. Here's why I need more. They're very good at saying, you know, look, here's how we run this thing. It's very, you know, efficient. And as a result, like they're able to go do that. And so what I think OWASP needs to do, Andrew and everyone does a fantastic job of where it is now, but it needs to go to the next level, which is to operate like that. And, you know, if you say to Zemlin, like, what's your role? He'll say, look, my role is fundraising, and I raise funds so the community can do their work. And, you know, and that involves things like being able to pay people full time and market rates. It's not like, oh, I can give someone a grant to go to a conference. It's like, I'll pay you what Google pays you. And you go work on free open source stuff. Like, you know, and I think that's the model that it needs to move into, whether that's 501c or 6 or whatever it is. I don't know is the answer.
Even I have, this is Vinod. Even I have a limited understanding of the US, the tax system and everything, but both are non-profit organization, but 501c3 is more like a charity type organization, whereas 501c6 is more like a chamber of commerce and business leagues, those kind of. So I believe those type of organization, they get most of the money from the, you know, the members itself, and they promote, you know, board membership and those kind of things, right? Like I think that is a model followed by some of other organizations who are making a lot of money and investing in it.
Yeah. I mean, look, you know, one of the other things I kind of learned from the Linux Foundation is that they've got, you know, the equivalent company structures all around the world. So again, like you look at multinational companies, like it doesn't necessarily want to be put against the tax bill in the US. I mean, like this is the way the world works, right? And so, you know, they may want to offset, you know, donations in Europe or maybe Australia or something. You know, you need to have the structures to be able to go pick that up, right? And and like I said, all of the corporate governance to be able to, you know, this is what we need it for. This is what we're going to return, and here's what we spent it on, and you know, all of that stuff. So it's like operating a company, but you have an altruistic goal, and you're there to provide all the resources to the community to do well.
But in your manifest, you talk about going to the next level, where for the more mature projects, OWASP could also be a facilitator of almost VC capital to create companies that have open governance that OWASP takes a percentage, right?
Yeah, exactly. So like one of the things So OWASP is in an incredible position in that it has projects, it has a captive audience, right? Like essentially, like everyone who participates is likely to want to buy security tools. They also like open source tools by the very nature of the fact that they're here. And so, there's an opportunity there to basically build a model which provides opportunities for people. And, like here, look, you guys should go form an open source core company. We'll invest in you to do it. We'll help you go do it. And it becomes a win-win, right? Like as long as the constraints are in there, the open core piece gets back into the community and gets better. They get to build an open core company. And if you do it in the right way, then you wind up basically taking equity like a VC would take. You'd probably run it more like one of these kind of Y Combinator type things. But you take an equity stake, and when those companies are successful, you wind up with an endowment back to OWASP. And it's not going to take long before you have a significant endowment. And so you've not only created opportunities for people, you've generated value for the people that have been participating in the community, and you've generated long-term value back to the company. So I think there's a huge opportunity there to do it.
Yeah, and you create a very nice business model to support the development and the work for code and services to support the tools, right? Because some of the tools and some of the projects OWASP has, for the next level, you do need a level of professionalism, of commercialization. Like, to be honest, like on my current role, I'm already worried about picking up an open source project that is not supported by a commercial company, because I'm worried about, I prefer to pay the services. I know that, in a way, I know that to build a successful open source company, so a successful company on top of open source project, you have to have a mindset that is very different than when you build a company that is a proprietary one, because then in the proprietary one, it's about locking the customer with the product. In the open source one, it's almost about providing enough added value on top of something that is free, but nothing is free, right? I'm paying for my own engineers to maintain the thing.
Totally.
There's an efficient way of using a consumer open source project.
This whole kind of like open, every single piece has to be open source, otherwise it's not open source. Like it's like 10, 15 years ago. Like I know some people still believe in that, but like the reality is, like the open core model, works well. I mean, what doesn't work is if someone just open sources some shitty little repo that doesn't actually do anything and then builds all on top of it. Like that's not okay, but you can protect against things. So as long as it provides meaningful value, end-to-end value, and you can build other value on top of it, that's great. And again, it's a win-win. And if someone else wants to build the same value that you're doing on top, like have at it. Like, everyone wins, right?
Yeah, and I think that's the potential that OWASP has, right? It sits on top of this amazing community, and in a way, like you mentioned already, like the amount of OWASP leaders who have grown through it. People like Michael Casey, right? Michael, that was basically now the CISO of Mozilla, right? He, like there's so many amazing people, right, that gone through OWASP.
I mean, look,
some got burned a bit, but it's insane, right? Like the talent pool that is available.
I mean, I was like, Simon Bennett, for frick's sake, like that guy's a legend, right? Like, has been working on that thing tirelessly when he was at Mozilla and everything else. Like, and I've only spoken to him a few times. One of the nicest guys you could ever want to speak to, built the most amazing product, and was bouncing between companies to work on that thing.
What's up?
Freaking Simon Bennett should be the founder of a company built around Zap, right? I can tell you, I will invest, Simon, if you wind up going and doing it. I'll write a check myself, and I'm sure you would do, because it's tech talent, and the amount of people that use Zap as well, it means that it's there. And I think that creating those opportunities versus people have to go figure out a job to work on their passion, it doesn't feel right. And I also think there's an opportunity to create opportunities for people that maybe wouldn't necessarily get those things, right? Like, we're living in a global, diverse world. Like, people in less privileged parts of the world, don't have access to go work at high-tech startup companies in many places. And, we can figure out also how to help that and diversity and all sorts of things. So I think there's loads of opportunities.
Yeah, I was thinking of Michael Coates, sorry. But Michael Coates is a good example, right? He did some great projects, and now, he's going to do a lot of other amazing things, right? And so Simon, I completely agree, is an amazing individual, one of my favorite OWASP leaders, but he's not the kind of person that's going to go out and talk to VCs, find the thing, and find the structure. What he wants to do is code Zap every day. So he's the
But that's
perfect
fantastic.
CTO
But that's what
or even
invest.
CEO of that, and you just put a team around him, right?
But look, you're investing in a company. It's about tech talent. You can put the team
Yeah.
around him. What you can't find normally is the tech talent. You could always find the other stuff. Like it's you know, I hate to say it, but it's like it's relatively easy and it's relatively formulaic. But what you can't find is the special sauce and the talented people like that. And you know, and it's helping them with the right structure and the right resources and helping them do it.
So my other ask for you, since you're going to be on the board, right? Or voting for,
I don't
candidate for the
know.
board, candidate for the board, right?
Candidate. I'm not taking anything for granted, and I think actually I'm going to get significant pushback from what I'm seeing now based on change. So
it's all good. I support it, so I'm a big fan, right?
All right.
So one of the areas I think you want to also put some energy on is the OWASP summits. I don't think you've ever been to one, but it's been also, I think, the thing that really has held OWASP together for a long time, because when we brought those 150 and then 180 and then actually 200 to the summit is the first time that a lot of these leaders came together, and we created so much stuff in those summits. That was amazing. Like, you know, that the one, I don't know if you know, but the one in Portugal, the second one was, and John Wylander, which is another amazing talent that drifted away a little bit. He got together the top security talent from Mozilla, Firefox, Google, and these guys had, from the browsers, they had written a book together, but they never met. So we got them all in the same place, and we had these sessions with all these guys, right?
Yeah,
awesome,
well, John's has written a novel, right? Have you seen his novel?
No, I haven't read it yet.
Oh, you can buy it on Amazon. It's good. I started reading it. Yeah.
So I think you know the summits, and actually, and I feel the thing I would just expand you on getting that professionalism. I think is that machine, the operational machine, to almost get the musicians. It's like you said, the tech talent is like the musicians. We need everything else to make sure that the guys arrive on time in the same place. You know, like the OWASP testing guide. If you look at the mobile testing guide, a lot of it has been written in the summits, and those guys love it, because literally there was 2 summits where the guys literally say, "Give me a villa," and 6 guys just sat down and worked together for a whole week, and they got so much stuff done, right? And getting the people together is awesome, right?
Yeah, and the musician ones, it's pretty interesting, right? Like, people need to have the best instruments, need to have the best tools, need to have a recording studio, but you ain't going to make them great musicians, right? The great musicians are the people who are great musicians. And I think there's some similar analogies, right? You talked about code analysis tools before. We jumped off of code.cat.net. So I am working. I've got a guy who's in my current company, Theo, who used to work at Amazon in the AWS security team. And he is building a set of static analysis rules on top of CodeQL, which we're going to get to OWASP. We're going to stick probably about in the November timeframe. And I think CodeQL is freaking cool. Like, you know, the difference between that and SemGraph, of course, is like you can build full data flow graphs, right? Like, you know, intra procedural and data flow analysis, which is what you need. There's obviously the trade-off between the two, but you know, for the most part, like, if you're going to produce high fidelity results, you need to be able to do data flow analysis. And so, you know, it sets it up pretty easy to find sources and sinks. And so we actually had some conversations last week with the GitHub guys who are actually in the UK who do it. Also great people. And what I was asking them initially was that my observation is all the static analysis tools just try and find vulnerabilities. So it's like, you know, how can I better find this problem or that problem? Not a single one of them goes into the code and tries to map data flow, or tries to answer questions like, you know, do I have an endpoint that doesn't have auth on it? And you can solve those problems with that technology by looking at data flow. You can do things like reverse engineer, you know, relational database schemas, and then figure out, oh shit, like someone's passing a credit card to an endpoint here that has no auth on it. And by the way, you know, from looking at other tools, you know, and by the way, I also know it does this. And so we're building that. And I think it's a huge miss that OWASP doesn't have a core project in static analysis, because it is one of the most widely accepted, you know, technologies by developers. I mean, who would not accept you putting linting and stuff in a CI pipeline? Like, every developer's like, it's like, we do it, right? But
you need to
OWASP doesn't have it.
I agree, right? But you need to look at the stuff I published with your O2 platform, because he was doing a lot of that stuff. Although the problem at the time was I did a lot of it on top of the IBM or the Ounce Labs engine, right? But the stuff I was doing, you know, it's fucking 15 years ago, still you can't do it today. right?
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
you know that the trick I had was I deleted all the rules, and then I ran the whole engine, and I created the whole trees, and I mapped all the source and sinks, and I ran it again, so I had millions of traces, and then I could ask those questions, right?
Yep.
So yeah, we should definitely. It's all open source.
Well,
right?
I'll introduce you to Theo, and when that OWASP project is ready to go, you can be you can get working on it, right?
Absolutely, looking forward to it. Cool. Okay, really cool question from Sam here, right? Which is, how do we deal with the education problem, right? So 20 years ago, OWASP projects and standards are still not in developers' curriculum. You open any book on Node.js development, and a lot of them, you know, none of them mention SQL and or some of the other OWASP vulnerability stuff that, you know, or any OWASP standards like, you know, the SVS and stuff like that we're doing, right? So how do we fix this, right? How do we get into education so every developer knows how to, you know, develop security?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I think this is a very big problem because I go to a lot of developer meetups and developer conferences, and we still have a lot of developers who have zero clue about OWASP, no understanding of any application security, how it should do. They probably 99% of developers heard of SQL injection, and they know how to mitigate this, but that's about it, right? So 20 years on, we're still there. And I ask a lot of people, well, were you taught about, you know, OWASP top 10 at university? No, I talked to a lot of university graduates, and they come to our events and say, oh, we're so happy we found this community. We just saw the OWASP mentioning somewhere, this is so great, you guys produce stuff. How come you still, we still do not have OWASP on the curriculum? I think this is our biggest problem, because 20 years old, we still have the same. I just came off a call with Jeff Williams, by the way, because Jeff was doing the demo of RASP at OWASP Suffolk chapter, and talk about vulnerabilities. So a question about how many vulnerabilities RASP can catch. And Jeff was saying, you know what, I've been with application security industry since day one, and the types of vulnerabilities have not changed much. However, I can say still 20 years on, developers still don't know about vulnerabilities. And I'm worried because we have people developing business critical applications with no understanding for security. We have people writing and publishing books on all the modern languages like Node.js, Go, whatever, not even a single mentioning of OWASP or any security standards or tools. How do we deal with this?
Well, I guess we've got time. Can we go over, Dinis? Can I answer in detail?
Absolutely. No, go.
Well, I think so. So I think it's a really important thing, and we should tackle it. But I think there's a bunch of there's a bunch of stuff, right? I'm sorry, I got a cough. One. There's a bunch of stuff. Like one is that if a developer comes to OWASP today, honestly, you're just completely lost. Like, you know, I know it's kind of calling the baby ugly, but like, go to the website. You haven't got a clue. Like, honestly. Like, put yourself in the shoes. If you're like a user experience person, you put someone somewhere and you try and watch what they do. You know, 250 projects. Like, okay, like most of it's news about the project itself. Like, I would expect to be able to go to a website and go, what's the problem I'm trying to deal with, right? And you know, am I a Java person? I'm trying to solve this problem. I'm a this person. I'm trying to solve this problem. And so, one thing I believe is that OWASP needs to be front end and center of education. And there's two things that need to happen. First of all, there needs to be commercial quality, you know, educational material, right? That needs to be developed. And again, pay people to go do it and put it up. And the secondly is like the user experience on the website needs to be such that people can go through it. Now that only solves problems like once you come there, right? Like once you get there. But I think it's also fair to say is like, and you said, Sam, like, they don't know about OWASP. Well, like, about what about OWASP, right? OWASP itself is a project. We spoke about the top 10.
No, I think they don't know about application security, Mark, and that is basically the fact that you started talking about security being a measure of quality, right? The whole thing at the beginning, and I think they still don't know that. 20 years old, we still have this problem. And I think this is one of the most pressing issues. I know we talk about tools, right? And the fact that the Linux Foundation can invest a lot of money into tools and my wonderful things like Let's Encrypt, but still it is unless we teach developers that they need to use the tools and how to design things securely, we will not be more secure, right? So I'm actually making a car analogy here because I said, okay, we need to have something like a seatbelt in a car analogy. So every developer should know how to code securely, just like every driver knows that the first thing they need to do when they get inside the car is put their seatbelt on, right? That doesn't happen today, and I think this is the next big thing which we need to address.
But do you think it's fair to say though, like if all it was a developer having to put a seatbelt on, I don't think you get pushback from any developers. But what you're asking them to do today is to check under the hood, put the seatbelt on, figure out the ignition key, figure out whether someone's put, spilled gas on the back of the car. Like, it's way too complicated, I think, for most engineers. Like, everyone's got a story about the obnoxious engineer, right? And everyone has them. But like, for the most part, 99% of developers, in my opinion, always want to do the right thing as long, and here's the key, as long as it's easy enough. And I don't think that the security industry in general, and frankly, OWASP specifically, have done a good enough job to make it easy enough. But I think we can, right? And that's part of the thing. I mean, I was chatting today with a CISO of a big game company, and I said to him, like, why? If I was chatting about this whole manifesto thing, right? There's loads of people I'm talking to about it. And I'm like, look, you train every time they onboard one of the developers. I think it's 5,000 at the company. Every time you onboard any of the developers, they put them through basic training. And I'm like, wouldn't you much rather have something where you could put them through OWASP basic training? We hook it into your single sign-on thing, and you know that they've taken these 10 things, and then they come back, and you only give them access to the Git source code repository once you got a token back for us. He's like, that'd be friggin' awesome. I'm like, would you pay $10 a year for it? Like, yes. Fantastic. Like, we could build a system like that training material is free for everyone. And again, back to the model, it's like, you want to hook it into SAML and connect it to your GitHub? Great. You're going to give us some money, and that all funds the engine, funds the thing, the
content creation.
But I mean, Sam, it's a kind of bullshit answer to your question, because like, it's really hard, right? Like, you've got universities, you've got, it's a mass thing, but I think it requires deliberate effort, deliberate thought. It requires creating great content, creating great ways to deliver it, and it's not static, right? Like, I mean, like, how can you keep up with all the security attributes of Node, right? Like, it's massive. So
but
you can't write some
high
level guidance, right?
But look, a lot of it is also about building a professional organization that can make things happen. Look, not being funny, but when I was a board member, I remember getting together 3 or 4 universities, sitting them together, and we were mapping the curriculum. We literally were creating curriculum with 5 or 6 universities all together. But that's because we put significant energy. Paulo and Sandra at the time were working, and they were awesome. But without that internal machine to get these people in the same place, working, mapping, doing a bit of the heavy lifting, like you said, the hard part, they will provide for free, right? But that momentum, it's very hard, and if you don't put in, what happens is nothing, right?
I mean, look, I don't know, maybe I've already done this, but like, I would have thought that producing computer science degrees are taught all around the world, and let's be honest, and I'm sure there are some professors listening, and I'm very sorry I'm about to say this, but like, most of them are lazy, right? Like, like, course prep is a big thing, but it takes a lot of time, and I'm pretty sure that if you produce application security 101, which can be slotted into most computer science classes, and you produce all of the content material, and then you go start a campaign to get it pushed into all the universities. I can't see many that are going to say no.
They want it, but you need to get it into their materials. You need to get in a structure that they want. There's the heavy lifting. In a way, it's quite interesting, because what I've learned was that you put energy, stuff happens. You don't put energy, almost the attrition, and almost sometimes OWASP was a great excuse for people to share. So I found that when I was asking these university professors, can you share that? It was easy for them to share, because, I'm going to give it to OWASP. And by the way, I'm getting this other stuff from OWASP. And they're already OWASP members, and they were playing the game effectively. Without OWASP in the middle, it becomes really hard. Oh, you're sharing this with another university? It becomes much more tricky, right? So again, that machine, the foundations are there, but you could see 5 years later, 10 years later, not much happens because there was no energy.
Sam, it sounds like you want to sign up to the new upcoming OWASP strategic education project. I think you heard him say that, Dinis, didn't you?
Exactly. I think Sam would be great to lead that. Right?
Seconded.
Actually, Mark, since you met Grant on this, right? Grant is actually a project leader of something called OWASP Curriculum Project. So they're already developing that curriculum. But again, it's how do we promote it and give it to everyone? I think Vinod has another question. So sorry, I'm gonna give the floor to Vinod.
Cool.
So do you ask? I can ask if you want, Vinod.
Yeah.
How do you? Is it the second one? Sorry. How do we?
I mean,
the second one. How do you achieve healthy competition?
Yeah.
Look, I don't think it is competition. I don't think it should be competition. I think it should be, partnership. Like, I don't think the only winners in this are going to be, better software, right? Like,
yeah.
And I don't think it's like, look, OWASP needs to be better than this or needs to be better than that. The space is massive, and there's enough interesting big projects for everyone to tackle. And I just think it would be much better to work constructively with, with others. OSSF are one that's doing a bunch of great work. I know them all personally very well, and they are fantastic people. But I think, and they've got a bunch of interesting things to take on. But there's a whole bunch of interesting things that OWASP should be taking on as well. And I think partnering with those two things, that'll help to do other things. I mean, look, OWASP, if OWASP figures out how to get some good static analysis, it's already got some good dynamic analysis with Zap proxy. You've got dependency track. I mean, like, you have the makings, you've got some education stuff, you've got some threat modeling tools, like you got the makings of an end-to-end AppSec stack. And if you go look at, Linux Foundation built this thing called LFX, which is the Linux security tool, which every single project in CNCF runs through it. I would love to see, OWASP have a similar thing with all the AppSec tools, as an example. So I don't think it's kind of like, can you build that one better than LFX? Like, maybe it's partnering by pulling those tools together. But I mean, my take is it shouldn't be a competition. It should be how does collectively the tide rise for everyone, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. Does that make sense, Vinod? Does that answer your question?
It does, but one thing I noticed, there is unhealthy competition. So that's one of the things. Like, I support multiple OWASP project, as dependency track or Cyclone DX, and there is a big challenge as a community for us. Like, we are going through, like, that's not I don't think that's a easy challenge we have, but that's what it is, right? So yeah.
So conflict within projects themselves within OWASP, is that?
No, it is not within OWASP, but outside foundation projects or other projects, like.
Yeah. I mean, look, some things are complex. I mean, look, I did a video interview thing with Steve the other day, and I've been involved in helping try and figure out SPDX Cyclone. And it's one of the most frustrating couple of weeks of my life. Like, I'll just be honest, because there's so much invested in each of those things. But the reality I came to at the end of it was, okay, everyone in the ideal world, maybe there's one SBOM standard. It ain't going to happen. Let both of them go on and do great stuff. And and Cyclone is obviously getting great adoption in the security world. I have utmost respect for Steve and all the stuff that that's doing there. But you've got SPDX, it's just got a large amount of adoption, particularly within licensing stuff. So, I think there's always been like overlap. I mean, you got Nginx and you got Apache HTTPD and things, right? You've always had kind of options. And I think that, I mean, ideally, sometimes you may have one, but I mean, look at that, Dinis. What are you meant? What's a developer meant to do when they come to find that? I mean, what the hell?
Well, it's already a decent mapping, right? And I agree that you want to map it by use cases, but it shows that there's a lot of very high quality projects that are part of the multiple bits. What's missing now is the distill from here to say what is relevant to me right now.
Well, but let me role play to you, right? I've come here and I'm a developer and I want to learn. So I click training and education. What do I do? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of those things? Is that what I'm meant to do?
Yeah, so you're right. The path, these are the tools. But I get, because what you want, yes, you're missing the bit in the middle here, which is, okay, I want to learn application security. I want to learn how to hack. I want to learn how to write secure code. I want to X. And then you can point to the specific parts of it.
Right. I mean, look, I got an API top 10. I got a mobile top 10. I don't know. Is there a Java top 10? Is there a Python? I think my point is like, I mean, it's hard, right? But it's hard to like be open and honest, but like, I got no clue. And if you put most developers here, you have no clue how to navigate this.
Mm-hmm.
And I get all the pieces are there, which is the fantastic thing. Yeah. But it has to be organized. And the reality is there are probably some things which have to go away because there's too much overlap, which causes too much problem for the end goal, right? The end goal should be to produce secure software, help the world produce secure software, not to keep projects, alive. And I think there needs to be a long, hard look at it and figure out, exactly like what's the problem you're trying to solve, and then figure out the best way to go solve it, right? Versus like, oh, these are all my ingredients. What am I going to cook tonight, right? It's like, if I'm going to throw all the ingredients into a pan, it's probably unlikely I'm going to get a beautiful paella or something.
Mm-hmm. All right. So first, last couple of questions. How does if somebody wants to get into application security, and we know that we want to get as much talent we want. And by the way, you have a new name for OWASP before. Do you want to say what that is? Instead of Open Web Application Security Project?
It's no longer just about the web. So I think it should be the Open Worldwide Application Security Project. I mean, it's got people worldwide, and I mean, you've got to keep W because the brand's still there. But web is it's not just about the web anymore, and that kind of like phrases it in the wrong place, right?
I would add to that one that by putting worldwide, what you also do is you embrace the chapters, which have always been the almost like the unloved, not the unloved part of OWASP. Maybe that's too hard, but I think it's the unsung heroes because it's the chapters that have really kept OWASP alive, that have given the worldwide coverage. I remember organizing a tour for Sami. Come on, remember the guy from thing. Literally,
SQL Slammer Sami.
Yeah, exactly. But I remember organizing my US tour in 20 minutes by just saying, I almost tell him which cities you want to go. And there was a chapter there, right? And
I used to do the same.
It's awesome,
I'd rock up in like Australia. It's like, oh, great. Here's this, or Southeast Asia, or India, or whatever. It's fantastic.
I love that worldwide because it really puts chapters at the heart of OWASP to say, hey, it is a worldwide community, right? And the chapters and the projects are really, and the conferences, although I think OWASP has to be careful not become a pure conference organizer, which for a while it is what it was becoming. I think the projects and the chapters are the heart. The conferences are just an amplification.
But I think there's multiple things in there, right? But I think the conferences are potentially very lucrative, and they go back to the funding model, and that's one of the drivers for it, right? Like you can't do it. I mean, the other thing is the mission, right? Like I think the mission should be help the world, help secure the world's software. Like everything's encompassed under that, but a North Star. That's all you need. Like none of this, like how we're going to do it or whatever. It's like, so great. How are we going to help secure the world's software? Well, we're going to create education material. We're going to create tools. We're going to create all of these things. Conferences. It's great. So as long as it points towards the North Star, every day you ask yourself, am I helping secure the world's software? Yes, great.
Yeah, and that's the beauty. So how does somebody get into it? So one of the things I'm trying to do now is in my recruitment, I'm making a big effort to hire people that have no cybersecurity. I literally on the job specs, I write, cybersecurity is not a core requirement for this. So I'm starting to have good traction. One of the things I really want to start to basically reference, but also see is what's the path, right? People want to get into cybersecurity. What is the path? What's your recommended path to get into cybersecurity? Because we all hacked our way into the industry, right? And I still think it's possible to do that today.
Speak for yourself. I don't know. I mean, well, I did the same. I mean, when we built SourceClear, no one had. Well, a few people did, but some people came over from Foundstone and other places. But very little people that were you would say were security people. And my belief was always is that it's much easier to teach developers security than it is to teach, it is to do it the other way around. And the reality is most security people are not good developers. I mean, that's just kind of what it is. It's changing, but it's traditionally kind of been what it is. So I think that by hiring great developers who have an interest in security is a great way to go do it. And then you wind up kind of with a cyclical effect of like, oh, because developers know how to talk to developers, they empathize with them, right? Like I mean, I always remember when I came out of MSDN, having ran that thing for 2 years, like I would have a lot more empathy with people on the other end of security reviews than I would the end, I went into, right? And you just do, you're like, oh my God, I'm being asked to do that. Like, that's ridiculous. And so I think also with developers, you have the ability to kind of like change your mindset sort of thing, or think a little bit differently. So, I mean, I think developers directly in is obviously one thing. I mean, Sam is going to build the most amazing education program, so we're going to have a flood of university students coming in as well, right? So that's going to help, which is going to be amazing. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's hard, isn't it? Like, I think, again, how do you approach tough topics? But like, if you look around at DEF CON, a certain type of people that go to those security conferences that are very different from the people that go to, go hang out in a dev co-working space in Shoreditch, right? They're just not the same types of people. And some of the people that would, hang out in the co-working space in Shoreditch are the very people that you want in. And so I think that there's, but again, I don't know, like, I think you're able to have multiple identities within the security community and within the AppSec community. And that's why I don't think anyone that's currently involved in OWASP should not be involved in OWASP. 100% clear. But I think there's other people that you need to bring in, the deeply technical people that are working maybe on, analysis frameworks, or things that aren't being done today, like runtime analysis and things like that. I know pockets of them exist, but I think that they can all work in harmony. But you have to intentionally cater for them. Otherwise, you go drop a hipster on his fixed wheel bike into DEF CON and he's just going to run a mile, right? And likewise the opposite way around. Like, you go take a DEF CON goon and stick him with $5 Americanos, and he's also going to run a mile, right? So I think you got to figure out what motivates the right people and build the structure to do it.
We need that diversity, right? Like, I had great success hiring doctors, right, to come into cybersecurity, right? And I think that if you look at great managers, great DevOps people, store managers, people from all sorts of different industries, it's sometimes they happen to land in those industries just because, that's what they are, right? Because their career and they happen to be good and they got trapped of it. But I think we need to find ways to bring them into cybersecurity because they can bring so much with them, right? And now comes a lot of diversity, which we also desperately need in cybersecurity, right? Or in general IT, but cybersecurity, we need that too. So how can we attract them?
Sometimes it's not obvious, is it? Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's not obvious. I'll tell you a funny story. I don't know whether we're running out of time, but a funny story is when I was building Source Clear, we had this lady come to help us figure out some sales things. And one of the things that you do is you have what's called an SDR, sales development reps. Like, for the most part, they're emailing or dialing for dollars, right? Like, they profile people, figure out who's to do it, and they get a certain amount of money for each warm lead they bring back in, right? And this lady basically said to me, she's like, do you know who the best people at doing this are? I was like, no. She said, physics PhD students. I'm like, what the hell? Like, what physics PhD student? But it turns around that what they're really good at is basically building the algorithm, figuring out who they call and how they can optimize their money. And of course, they're desperate for money. And so, like, you find things in weird places, right, of people. And I think that, security is a really interesting thing. There's loads of opportunities for it, and it makes no sense. But I think you got to go looking, and you got to figure out how to provide the right environment for them to want to come. Right?
Cool. All right. Final question. We've been doing this for 25 years, right? Why are we so passionate about it? But you give your answer. Why are you still so passionate about application security 25 years in? Which is awesome, by the way.
I like the difference in it now. Like John and I, I've known John for 20 years. Like I said, he was one of the first advisors and stuff. And we're literally just figuring out what to build in this new startup. And the approach that we took was we went out and asked everyone. Robert, we had a bunch of crazy ideas, right? It's going to least privilege and open source, go and enforce it automatically and things like that. But ultimately, you went out and asked people what the problem were. And, the problem that came back was not one that I I'd really thought of, but it was one like, look, everyone's too busy doing, it's busy work. Like no one can hire the right amount of people. Tools are firing off alerts left, right, and center. No one understands business context. We're now living in a world with machine learning, like bring all the data in, use machine learning to figure out what's the most important thing to go fix. And that's a really new problem, right? Like fundamentally, like you're in the security space solving the same security problem, but you're now using big data, using machine learning to go figure out how to do it. Awesome. You can also build on top of things like CodeQL and GraphQL and other tech. And machine learning stuff is so interesting these days that like that's fundamentally different to where it was before. So I think it's always being refreshed, right? Like for me anyway, like I think it's just, and the ability to spin up like mass infrastructure these days is just insane. Like, so yeah, I don't know. Come on, what's your answer?
I don't know, it's a very for that, right? I think it's the fact that we making the world safer, and it's still insanely challenging, right? It's really, it's really interesting the problems we're solving, and seeing at scale. I think Sam has sometimes a bit of a pessimistic view of this. I feel that we know how to build secure software today. We know how to do these things. There's enough data, there's enough systems. The problem now is at scale. The problem now is how do you create a system where the business is accelerating? It's almost like how do we hack the organization so the organization itself creates a secure ecosystem? It doesn't mean there's no vulnerabilities, but it means that it's like a living organism that is able to sustain. And that's really freaking fascinating, right?
Yeah, but look, that's been, again, I hark back to Microsoft, right? I mean, look what they did with the SDO. It's the laughing stock of the internet, right? Gates sends out a memo, and before you know it, like they're being held up as, this is the way to go do it, publishing
exactly.
books. And I can tell you, like, at Microsoft, it was a machine. But again, it's because it's a really well-run business. Like they know how to go take stuff out. They invest the right stuff in all the right materials, the right processes, the right tools, the right education. They hire the right people. I mean, the people that were in TWC, absolutely fantastic. So yeah, I mean, it's not that there aren't precedents for doing it. And like you said, I don't think it's not rocket science, but it does have to be organized. It's got to be funded and it's got to be executed, right? It can't be, I'll produce a piece of material and hope people come find it. Unfortunately, the world doesn't work like that. Right? But, I mean, we got learning management systems, right? Like, hook into all that. I don't know. I mean, Jim Manico is like, what an amazing, like, again, he's such a fantastic person, advocate, like the amount of work he's done, and he gets paid back, of course, by it, but he deserves every bit he's made because of the amount of effort he puts in. But again, like, you've got world-class trainers that are there, making material available online. You've got learning management systems. I mean, these are just things that you got to figure out how to get to people, right?
Cool. All right, Mr. Curphey, thank you very much.
We done?
Yeah.
All right.
Unless you have any other further
Excellent
topics you want to expand.
I'll see you soon. Tell your wife to get the barbecue ready because I'm going to come around to your house soon.
Absolutely. Always welcome, man. Let's do a barbecue in London. All right. Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Bye.